which our predecessor committee required of HS2. So it is an issue we are alert to as a committee. So thank you very much for that. And we will now move on, and I apologise for the time that it's taken us to get to the next petitioners, but it's Pickmere Parish Council, and I think represented by Sarah Flannery. Flannery.
Thanks, Jim.
And Chris Tarrant as well. So.
I am concerned that our petition might be seriously compromised by the lack of time.
I'm sorry about that, but the committee meets and finishes at 7 today. If members agree, we may go 5 or 10 minutes over, but we all have other appointments. I have an appointment from 7:30 onwards, so I can't, unfortunately, we can't stay any longer. But this is, I do try and urge petitioners at the beginning of all of the sessions to drill down very quickly and very swiftly to the asks, as opposed to lots of contextual information that is not of any value to the committee. So I can only do that, I'm afraid. So on that basis, we'll try and proceed as best as we can. So.
Right. So, as you know, I'm Sarah Flannery. I'm a Pickmere resident for 21 years and a former parish councillor.
And I'm Chris Tarrant. I'm also a resident of Pickmere for nearly 34 years and also a former parish councillor. We're conscious of the time, so I'm not going to dwell on any more on the introduction. We will try to get straight to the point. And in terms of introducing the village and some of our issues, could I ask that we call up the first slide, A87-1, and Sarah will start to explain.
We'll give minimal background and context. We won't waste the time on that. But this slide really shows that Pickmere is a tranquil and pretty semi-rural village. We have 300 households who live close to nearby Wincham, with the larger town of Knutsford some 5 miles away and Northwich is 3. You rarely see HGVs along our country lanes due to the 7.5-tonne weight limits on most of them, but you are as likely to see tractors, walkers, runners, cyclists and horse riders as cars. And surrounding us is valuable green belt, which is grassland, with dairy and arable farming. The beating heart of our village is Pickmere Lake, and it's important that you recognise that, because we will come onto Pickmere Lake specifically later on in this petition. But it's a treasured village asset that's visited by tens of thousands of people every year. The showground for the county's premier agricultural event, the Royal Cheshire County Show, is also in the parish and attracts thousands of visitors, exhibitors and competitors every June. It was 80,000 last week. It's important that you recognise we have no school, no shop, no healthcare, nor local employment of any kind. So residents are wholly reliant on being able to travel to and from the village to adjacent locations for education, employment, shopping, healthcare and culture. It's fair to say we felt like minnows during the entire process since proposals for Phase 2B were first announced. And it seems to us that you, the Select Committee, are our only bulwark against mitigating the massive disruption that HS2 will bring to our village. The promoter's response has ameliorated one of our primary concerns about Budworth Road, but it has added others. New information previously unknown to us has been provided. Some assessments have been recategorised from moderate to severe, but it is the overriding tone that is most concerning to us. HS2 specific figures for schedules, vehicle movements, etc. seem to be too precise, with no margin for error to be credible across such a long time frame. There are also numerous references to the promoter noting points with no further action described, and several references to issues being described as minor, moderate or significant without local context. And these terms really are subjective. Whilst we get that HS2's position can broadly be summarised as having an answer, budget and plan for everything, our petition really focuses on a real village with real people and their real concerns, who need to be confident that the promoter truly understands and cares about the problems this massive project brings to our doorstep. One other short point I'd like to make is that all the promoter might imply that those who haven't petitioned can be regarded as broadly being in approval of their plans. That doesn't acknowledge that the petitioning process itself puts a huge onus on the petitioner. That might explain why some parties have simply not had the energy to participate in a process where they feel the odds are stacked against them. without the benefit of proactive engagement with the promoter until October 2022, and it would be churlish of us not to record the efforts of Ben Draper and his team from this date, and lacking a collaborative approach from our local authority, Cheshire East, we have had to climb the vast data mountain without legal counsel or financial resources. So our first ask is that the Select Committee, for reasons of fairness and transparency, requests that the promoter identifies all material that has been specially prepared and presented for the petitioning process. Because it has been galling for us to realise that people have been shown fresh tables, cross-sections and maps, particularly relating to traffic impacts, that haven't been previously made available. HS2 Limited stated in a previous petition hearing that they hadn't adopted this format from the outset because local authorities had the data on road usage and local authorities are the experts on roads. But the same can't be said for small parish councils, residents and other stakeholders who've been left trying to interpret the data themselves. No one factored in the real problems for communities such as ours who are trying to understand the impacts on their locality without the active support and engagement from their local authority. Cheshire East Council effectively abandoned us when they withdrew from the petitioning process. So moving on, we're going to highlight the following issues from our petition. The first one being fuel security and water quality. Now, I know you already know that Innovan Chlorvinyl Limited uses purified brine to produce the chlorine which is used to purify 98% of the UK's drinking water. It's the building block for numerous other chemicals as well. A failure to supply brine to the ICV business would result in the cessation of the purification of water in the UK within 2 days. Now, the promoter's response is, and I'm quoting, "The proposed scheme would be designed to allow the continued safe extraction and use of the existing Holford brine field, and as a result, the impact on salt resources and human health are not considered to be significant. However, the consented Springbank Farm extension to Holford brine fields sits partially under the route of the proposed scheme, which could impact on the viability of 5 of the proposed 12 caverns. Therefore, it is anticipated that significant residual effects may occur with respect to sterilisation of the salt resources associated with the Springbank Farm extension to Holford Brinefield." So in layman's terms, does this mean that there could be a negative impact? We request that the promoter is required to provide clarity because we couldn't understand it. On a similar vein, we also request that the promoter is required to give an undertaking to publish at the earliest opportunity the results of those ground investigations already undertaken. Fuel security is also a significant concern for residents of Pickmere and the whole country. Now, our nationally strategic secure gas storage is in local salt cavities, which again you know. HS2 Phase 2B directly compromised plans to add 50% additional capacity due to the sterilisation in 2013 of the £300 million King Street Energy gas storage project, all set to go with planning permission, which would have added 10 new cavities equating to 5 additional days storage to our national capacity. The promoter's response was thus, and I quote, "As outlined in 10.4.47 of Volume 2 MA02 of the main ES, the consented King Street Energy extension to Holford Brinefield sits partially under the land required for the construction of the proposed scheme. Once built, the route of the proposed scheme would not impact on the proposed cavern locations. This would result in a negligible impact on a very high-value resource, resulting in a negligible effect. In effect, HS2 says the new route does not affect gas storage expansion." Well, the Chief Executive Officer of NPL Group, which owns King Street Energy, completely contradicts that. I have John Loseley, the Chief Executive Officer's permission to quote him verbatim as follows. 1. The current line placement of HS2, last updated in October 2022, safeguards approximately 86 acres of our 240-acre site at King Street, some on a temporary and some on a permanent basis. Planning permission has been secured and implemented for a gas storage project on King Street, but it is not possible to build the consented scheme given the land take safeguarded by HS2. So we request that the promoter is required to give an undertaking to explain this disparity at the earliest opportunity. For clarity, when the then Secretary of State, John Prescott, granted planning permission in 2009, he did so due to the national need, a need that's far greater now. It was the 2013 preferred route that completely sterilised any possible expansion to gas storage in mid-Cheshire, HS2 Limited having failed to adhere to their own route selection criteria by not identifying the salt mineral reserves. That cost the country and King Street Energy dear. The 2016 realignment went some way towards desterilisation, but construction of safeguarded land means the outcome remains the same. Expansion of the King Street Energy site is not currently considered viable by the owners, so HS2 Limited has effectively sterilised the site. Second, ground conditions and existing infrastructure. I can practically hear the groans, but please indulge me for just a couple of minutes. No one has ever said that HS2 Phase 2B cannot be built with the technology to put man on the moon. But the real equation is risk and safety versus value for money. HS2 clearly accepts that there is the element of risk given Cheshire's geology, but until the final ground investigations are done and the design complete, the cost of mitigating that risk is unknown. The design is in its infancy, and we estimate at least 85% of the ground investigations have yet to be undertaken. Ultra-high-speed rail requires very small tolerance of ground movement, measured in millimetres, which is why the risk-cost balance is so critical in an area of persistent ground movement. As Professor Emeritus Peter Stiles, the past president of the Geological Society of London, says, it is possible to deal with almost any adverse ground conditions, but the question is it economic? So the question for the Select Committee really is, can the present route be justified on cost and safety grounds, or must an alternative be recommended? Mr. Mould said in a previous hearing that we do not want a collapse under our railway. Well, when the New York office of the White Star Line was informed that the Titanic was in trouble, the White Star Line Vice President Franklin announced, "We place absolute confidence in the Titanic. We believe the boat is unsinkable." By then, the Titanic was already at the bottom of the ocean, so we should not even contemplate the possibility of these unknown risks. Mr. Mould also previously referred to existing infrastructure safely crossing the same geology. I don't think we can take much comfort from this example of the current adjustments in place for rail infrastructure to cope with ground movements. Matt, could we have slide 2, please? A872. Thank you. This is the reality. This image is taken from Elton Flashers near Sandbach on the Crewe to Manchester line. It shows the jacking up arrangements in place to cope with the River Wheelock and subsiding land, which is continuously monitored. I remind the Select Committee that the tolerance for ground movement for ultra-high-speed rail is measured in millimetres. No matter how sophisticated the monitoring arrangements that HS2 claims, the as-yet undesigned adjustment mechanisms will be very, very expensive. With regard to the Winsford salt mine, because the promoter acknowledges that that is one of the impacted areas, the committee might also like to reflect on the expert opinion of Caroline Warburton, a geologist and geotechnical engineer, a fellow of the Geological Society with a degree in geology and an MSc in geotechnical engineering and an MA in land use planning. You're ahead of me, Matt. Thank you so much. So I'm quoting, "Salt extraction and potential pillar failure in the Winsford mine. The proposed HS2 route crosses the Winsford mine. The salt pillars carry the load of the roof and are subject to compression. Pillars will deteriorate with time due to both chemical and physical processes, which are difficult to characterise or predict. The voids in the collapsed rock above may or may not reach the surface with a sudden catastrophic failure. The stakes are too high for anything less than total confidence in the route choice. We request that in the interests of safety and cost, the Select Committee takes this opportunity to use its powers to make the appropriate amendments to the bill to recommend that at least no further work on Phase 2B should be undertaken until the promoter has completed and reported on the ground investigations upon which everything depends. Parliament and the people need confidence in the claims that the proposed route can be safely and affordably built across a landscape of ongoing ground movement. I think the publication of the ground investigations would do much to repair public confidence in this regard. I'm going as fast as I can. Community isolation. We have no reason to doubt that the environmental statement accompanying the bill is fully compliant with legal requirements and developed in accordance with the accepted best practice methodologies. But what is up for legitimate debate is whether or not the communities afflicted by the scheme have felt that there's been sufficient engagement with them to use their local knowledge to input their concerns and sufficient commitment put into reducing the stress and negative impacts. This is a continuing theme. HS2 Phase 2B will never serve the Pickmere community. The construction phase will see our village surrounded by 6 construction compounds in existence for up to 6 years and 3 months. The proposed Pickmere Lane satellite compound is within the parish, and there are 2 further satellite construction compounds within neighbouring areas. The Pickmere Lane satellite compound is expected to be operational for 4 years, with an average of 70 workers per day, increasing to 120 workers and 45 staff at peak times. That represents an increase of 28% on our current village population of 600. The promoter's measures for managing the impact of the compound are, frankly, unworkable. I refer to page 42, paragraph 25 of the promoter's response document. I'll just cut through it. The number of private car trips to and from the construction compounds, both workforce and visitors, would be reduced by encouraging alternative sustainable modes of transport or vehicle sharing. These will be supported by an overarching framework travel plan that will require construction workforce to be travel plans to be produced. It will hold a range of measures, particularly a provision of information on and promotion of public transport services, provision of good cycle and pedestrian facilities, liaison with public transport operators, promotion of car sharing, and the appointment of a travel plan coordinator. Well, the reality is that anyone with local knowledge would know that these statements are meaningless. You can promote public transport as much as you like, but that won't change the fact that there's only one public transport operator who currently runs 4 services a day from Pickmere to Knutsford, 0705, 1010, 1210, 1410, and 3 in the opposite direction. Likewise, you can talk about providing good pedestrian and cycling facilities, but we don't have the roads for cycle routes. And anyway, unless people live close enough to contemplate walking or cycling in all weathers, this is a non-starter. So, rather than talking about impractical and vague aims, we therefore request that the Select Committee requires the contractor to produce a transport service for staff. The construction industry has well-established site traffic management protocols, and a coach service to and from the compound will eliminate hundreds of vehicle movements, reduce congestion and reduce pollution. Next slide, please. Thank you. Number 4. 874. Thanks. Please try to imagine the impact of a huge embankment with a railway line on top bisecting your previously pretty and quiet village would have on you, your neighbours, and your quality of life. Pickmere's community viability and well-being relies on accessibility to other community facilities, such as public transport, shops, and schools. The access to these will be seriously compromised due to the numerous diversions, changes to the road network, and congestion due to high volumes of HGVs carrying construction materials. The Royal Cheshire Show is an example where Wincham, Tapley and Pickmere are all significantly impacted by the increase in HGVs. We have a 4-day inconvenience for 80,000 vehicles. It's hard to understand the impact of something that will go on for the best part of a decade. Also, words such as moderate to describe the impact of a 3-kilometre increase in journey times are completely inappropriate for somebody who's facing that 3-kilometre detour twice a day, every day for more than 3 years. That's an additional 1,500 kilometres annually per vehicle. So it's certainly not a moderate impact, and that's just one route. We also can't agree with the promoter that, as set out in Section 6 Community, the assessment of the MAO3 Community Area Report within Volume 2 of the main environmental statement, the assessment did not identify community isolation effects to the village of Pickmere. If we can have the next slide, please. Thank you. This is a bird's eye view of Pickmere surrounded by HS2 activity. The large red areas are the satellite compounds. Isolation effects arise from either physical islanding of properties or an increase in journey times, and both are evident for residents in the village. So what we're really looking for is some effective and constructive mitigation measures to offset the impact on community isolation and well-being, and to make an undertaking to engage with our community to ensure these measures are appropriate and relevant for us. Would also request that, given that we feel effectively abandoned by Cheshire East Council's decision to withdraw from the petitioning process, that HS2 Limited is required to treat Pickmere Parish Council as a key stakeholder on mental health and community wellbeing issues, and undertake to guarantee engagement with the Parish Council on all associated issues. This has been missing for a long time. We also have to take into account loss of visual amenity and noise impacts. I think because we've got so much to say and we're trying to squish it in, let's skip slide 6, Matt, and we'll go straight to slide 7, if we may. You happy with that, Chris? Yeah. So this just gives an example. Running trains on the raised embankment are, in our area, it's 2.5 kilometres long, up to 12 metres high, with an additional 6.5 metres for catenary. It's enormous. Compounded by all of the major engineering works right across the parish. It's going to have a serious impact on our visual amenity. And we're worried that the consequent sound transmission will impact significantly as well. The large-scale structure will be very out of character with our existing views. In terms of mitigation for the loss of visual amenity, we do not consider the minimal planting proposed to be in any way sufficient. We recently received another assurance talking about additional hedgerows. Well, hedgerows cannot replace trees, and we're looking for more than a reasonable endeavour. We're looking for something more substantive and robust in terms of the mitigation that we need. Construction noise, I mentioned, is a big issue, and we noted with concern that the SES1 had identified operational noise effects on the acoustic character in the residential community of Pickmere at approximately 45 dwellings in the vicinity of Pickmere Lane, School Lane and Hall Lane. I quote, "The noise effect is likely to result in a significant community effect identified as MAO3-0-C5 on SES1 and AP1 ES map. 45 dwellings is 17% of our village homes. It's a very significant proportion. The Parish Council was completely unaware of this number until we saw it included in the promoter's response document. So can the promoter confirm the affected households will be contacted personally with the engagement of the Parish Council? So further we request that the promoter is required to propose additional mitigation measures to provide effective sound and visual acoustic improvements, to provide more creative and extensive planting designs, and provide noise insulation and ventilation from the construction phase, not operational phase, for those 45 dwellings identified, to ensure that the noise and air quality impacts are minimised from the outset. Right, I think at this point it's probably going to be useful, if you don't mind, Chris, to switch to you. If we can have the slide 8, please, Matt. Thank you very much.
We do have to just be cognizant of time. Of course, we've got to get HS2 to respond as well. So
I'm very cognizant of time.
Does this relate to transport?
This relates to transport. So this is really just to build on what Sarah's said, to show that there are significant vehicle movements.
There are two glaring issues that haven't been taken into account by Cheshire East either. So
okay, I mean, all I would say on that is we have made clear as a committee that we will not engage in transport management issues, because they are the preserve of the Highway Authority, who are Cheshire East, who have obviously withdrawn their petition on that. If you wish to raise them, please do, but as a committee, we've determined we're not going to engage ourselves in
I think
transport.
in the interest of time, let's respect that. You understand the issue. Yeah. It's a burden we have to bear. But can we move on then and look at slide 9? Sarah mentioned Pickmere Lake. It's important that the committee understands the significance of Pickmere Lake, which is called Pickmere Lake for a very good reason. The issue isn't that it doesn't fall within the area potentially impacted by the proposed scheme. It's that anything to do with the lake has a massive impact on our village, and it's vital that the promoter takes this into account. The lake is a leisure destination, has been for decades, and is visited annually by thousands of visitors that come from way outside the area, particularly from Manchester and the Liverpool conurbations. This slide shows the local paper reporting the congestion that we get during peak months. And believe me, it's very bad. As recently as last weekend, the police were imposing dispersal orders and are ticketing cars that are parked illegally. This is just another factor on our current country lanes, which doesn't appear to have been taken into account by the promoter.
Or indeed Cheshire East.
Or indeed Cheshire East. And it is very significant on our village. I think also we should refer as well to the Cheshire Showground. I don't want to dwell on that particularly because the highline figures are we've just had the annual Cheshire Show. 80,000 visitors have attended that in 2 days with all of the setting up and the dismantling. That, though, is a small-scale problem compared to the 6-7 years of construction that we've talked about and that we're aware of, notwithstanding the fact that the actual show itself is threatened by the arrival of the railway, which will probably make the showground as it stands unsuitable, and once it's relocated it's unlikely ever to return, which then in turn has a significant effect on the local economy.
No, you don't leave the next.
If we just go to number 10, I think you'll all be familiar with this. This is the peak movement tables. Behind this, and in the interest of brevity, there is an awful lot of work that is actually scheduled to take place, which is to do with diversion of gas mains, diversion of Flittergate Lane, access roads to carrying Pickmere Lane over Waterless Brook, realignments of Pickmere Lane, realignment of School Lane, Frog Lane, Temporary Bridge, etc., etc. So our concern with these figures are that they almost seem to be too precise to be credible. There is a methodology behind the way that the promoter has produced these figures, but they're averages really, and I don't think we as a community can accept the figures as they stand, because the reality is our roads are narrow, they carry quite a high volume of local traffic. There's a rat run effect as well with people that use Pickmere Lane when there's a problem on the Chester Road. And as has been mentioned by the previous petitioners, and we would emphasise as well, these lanes are shared with horse riders, cyclists, pedestrians, and they're really insubstantial B roads, and they also currently carry weight limits restricting their use to HGVs. So we acknowledge these figures, but we can't accept them in the sense that they seem very precise. They're predicated on a formula that we don't recognise, and even on an average basis, the volume of traffic that suggests in and around the village is considerable on roads that we really don't feel are suitable to carry that volume of traffic.
I think I would go straight on to acknowledge Budworth Road.
Yeah. So we'll jump through some of the other things that we said, but we'll just talk to you about Budworth Road. We have met with Ben Draper and his team. We have suggested an alternative to the stopping up of Budworth Road, which is something that concerned us and I think concerns other petitioners, some of whom you may have heard, some of whom are yet to present their concerns. We feel that we have actually found a workable solution, and although there is no current assurance on that basis, we would ask that the promoter gives us an undertaking that the work as proposed to avoid the stopping up of Budworth Road will form part of the additional provisions that may be needed to be introduced to avoid that. And in doing so, What it also does is it removes the need for HGVs to be routed along some of these substandard roads that I've referred to. If it would help, I've got a few photographs which... Okay. I'll leave the photographs for the moment.
Sure.
I mean, they're narrow lanes. Suffice to say, there are dogleg bends. An HGV competing with a 4x4 or a private car makes it very difficult. I think you can see from those slides that's the type of road that we have in the village and its current unsuitability. The other advantage, of course, is that if we avoid stopping up Budworth Road, there's no need to actually widen these roads, which we understand would not then be restored to their country nature. So we would avoid the urbanising effect in the village and avoid the use of all those HGVs. Moving on to wildlife and the environment, HS2 makes many claims about its green credentials. We have independently, as part of our neighbourhood plan, commissioned Cheshire Wildlife Trust to write a report on the nature, and their conclusions in their report conclude that much of what has been concluded by the promoter is fundamentally flawed, amateurish and riddled with inaccuracies. Those are quotes. So can HS2 confirm that it has 100% confidence in the measures that it's used to calculate the value of nature affected by Phase 2B, and that it hasn't missed watercourses, ponds and trees out of the data in our area?
Slide 15, please, Matt. Thanks.
There are two maps that have been produced for us by Cheshire Wildlife Trust, which you can see now. The top image shows our habitat distinctiveness in relation to the proposed route of HS2, and the second identifies our wildlife corridors. We believe the primary proposed mitigation measures of woodland habitat creation to replace ancient woodlands and to provide connectivity between habitats and a provision to maintain vehicle and pedestrian access to the Cheshire Showground during construction fall woefully below the measures that will be required to minimise the impact of this massive and extended construction.
Can we, I'm really conscious of time, and we have to have the promoter respond.
Okay.
So if you could maybe wrap up within 3 minutes.
Summarise.
And
okay.
what we really, as I say, said at the beginning was, what are the asks? So if you've any remaining outstanding asks, and then we'll get to the petitioners, to the promoter.
Okay. Community relations. This, is an open secret that community relations have never been HS2 Limited's strong suit. We've been underwhelmed by HS2's attempts at community engagement thus far. We found them difficult to deal with. And
okay, sorry to just interrupt again, but we're very short. Okay, this is commentary. What we really require is, what are the asks, please?
What we want the Select Committee to make recommendations that will ensure lessons have been learned. We want the same formal, dedicated liaison arrangements that the previous petitioner has asked for, because we think that that's the only way forward for villages such as ours. We need to guarantee a minimum level of engagement between Pickmere Parish Council, HS2 Limited, their contractors, Cheshire East Council and other stakeholders. A nice diagram is not sufficient. And also, as problems will inevitably occur as this progresses, it's critical that this includes a clear chain of command and communication so problems can be identified and resolved as quickly as possible. And that liaison role should not be a comms or PR role, because swift resolution will depend on a thorough operational understanding. I'm sure you get where we're coming from. And just the final slide, please, 17, if I may. I just want to clarify something. At the hearing of the Lostock Graham petition on 18th of April, Mr Percy stated, obviously Parliament has decided that this line is to be built, but it hasn't. Hugh Merriman, the Minister of State for Transport, clarified, I would also note that Parliament can reject or significantly amend the overarching bill, or can decide not to proceed with the scheme were it to choose to do so. It isn't a fait accompli, and we hope that you listen to the local knowledge and concerns of petitioners. It is beyond the remit of us to discuss the scheme in principle, but I would say that one very serious concern for us is that unless a local authority, in our case Cheshire East, included in their undertaking document every single issue across the whole of the local authority area where they have responsibility, ground conditions, highways, mitigation, You, the Select Committee, might consider their silence on these matters as being tantamount agreement that they were happy with all the plans. Please do not misinterpret Cheshire's reasons for withdrawing from the petitioning process. It would be a travesty if their withdrawal was allowed to undermine our petition and those of other petitioners who have worked very hard to raise their concerns on many vital issues. Now, if you'd asked me at the beginning, could we reduce a 1.5-hour presentation to 30 minutes, I would have said we're pushing it. No. That, I think, is the best we can do.
You've done a very good job, apart from the error of correcting the chair, which was a brave move, Mrs. Flannery. Just to reiterate that Parliament has decided the principle of this bill and has passed it at second reading and passed it to this. So the principle of this railway line is agreed by Parliament. But of course the legislative process hasn't concluded, and the bill will return to the Commons and at some stage. So I'm going to just briefly summarise where I think we need a response from HS2, and I hope this is in line with where you were heading. There's obviously the issue around the communication and dedicated liaison, which the Parish Council have asked for. I have written down the issues of, I should say to Mr. Tarrant and Mr. Flannery, the issue of ground conditions is something the committee has gone through in some detail before, so don't feel we haven't done that justice, because that has come before us before, and indeed I think we're still waiting for the final, but there is something further coming forward from HS2, or has that now been next week, I think, in relation to the specific of the salt mine and the brine ground conditions. So we have dealt with that. So, or we are dealing with that. The dedicated liaison, I had the issue of the screening and the request for more significant screening along that embankment. I believe the specific ask was the planting of trees. You asked questions about the environmental statements of HS2. Those are really for direct communication, I feel, rather than specific ask for us. I believe there was an issue around travel arrangements to the construction site, which you also raised. In terms of the other issues around traffic, as I've said, we have already, because there will have to be traffic management plans, which you as a parish council will be able to contribute to via the principal authority at some point. So unless I've missed anything there, I think if we just can start with those, and then if there's anything else, and I do commend you for getting that down from an hour and a half to half an hour. It was very impressive. So Mr. Mould.
I've got 30 seconds, I think. So
no, well, we're going to... Well, you've got 2 minutes.
2 minutes, excellent.
But we're going to go beyond by 5 or 10 minutes. Because I think that, given you've come all this way and you've cut it down, I'm sure we can maintain a quorum for 5 or 10 minutes of additional time. He says, forcefully looking at his colleagues and them all trying to avoid my gaze. But anyway, we will continue on so we can give some justice to the response, please, Mr. Mould.
Right, community relations and ensuring that the local communities are properly informed, engaged with during construction of the railway. It's not true to say that it's an open secret that HS2 is considered to be no good at that. I'm not aware that that is an open secret at all. My understanding is that although it's certainly we certainly don't claim that it's foolproof, that generally speaking, the process of community relations on phase 1, which is the part of the railway that is which is actually reached a significant state of construction, is considered to have been effective. I've drawn your attention in previous hearings to the published community relations strategy. I've shown you some examples of the granularity, if you'll excuse that fashionable jargon word, the granularity of the information that is provided. I think we showed you a slide or two from Northamptonshire in that respect. That is the approach that will be taken in relation to phase 2B. Contrary to the implication of what was being said on behalf of the petitioner, the impacts of this railway on Pickmere village are not comparable in scale to those that we acknowledged in relation to Crewe Green. And so that is, if one wants to draw a distinction, that is why the Crewe Green works merit the designation of a special management zone, and that is why the works in relation to Pickmere Parish do not. If you turn up page P435, you can see Pickmere itself at the top of the page. And you can see the extent of the pink, which shows you the working area, the combined construction boundary for the railway. Pickmere is in a very different situation in terms of its geography and its relationship to the railway line and its construction than the Crewe Green residents. Just to illustrate the point, what is happening here is, as you know, that the traffic is largely being run up and down the A556, that is to say the HS2 construction traffic. It comes in from the east to transfer nodes to the work sites at appropriate points along the primary route network. So Crewe Green, it comes in on the A50. Here it comes in on Pickmere Lane. Pickmere Lane is not, that's the road which runs, that's the dashed green line that is just coming in from the bottom right-hand corner of the slide. Pickmere Lane is not as significant a route as the A50, but it is a route that has been judged as suitable to carry HS2 construction traffic as far as the railway line itself. And as you can see, it's coming into work sites on the trace itself, which lies significantly to the east of Pickmere village. Now, the concern that the arrangements that caused a great deal of concern to the local community, but not only to this parish council but also to others living in the vicinity of School Lane, was the proposal which remains under the bill to close Budworth Road, and in order to gain access to work sites to the west, at the point where, if we just go up, it's very dark, my screen, I can't actually see, if you just run the cursor along there and then go across the railway at that point, go slightly to the right, to the work sites on either side of, there we are. To get to those work sites with Budworth Road closed was going to require the traffic to go on a loop around School Lane and then coming back on itself. Now that's still in the bill, but the HS2 is developing a proposal which would enable Budworth Road to remain open and thus avoid the need to go with any significant degree of vehicles to the west of the trace in this area. Now that as a stroke will considerably reduce the effects on the area of Pickmere Parish to the west, and we believe will significantly reduce the impacts that have caused concern to the local community. We have offered an assurance to Cheshire East Council to make that change. It will need to come through as an AP, so it would need to come through a future AP. The initial informal response from Cheshire East Council is that they support it, and we expect the local community to support it as well, because it clearly responds to one of their major concerns. I don't accept that Cheshire East Council, as it were, withdrew their petition as it was put on sinister grounds. They told you why they were able to express their satisfaction with the assurances that they had. They made a statement to that effect, and that is, I'm sure, the basis on which this committee will proceed. I acknowledge, if we turn to A87.7, turning to the visual impact point, I acknowledge that the presence of the Pickmere embankment will be visible in the landscape, because it is an embankment. It is proposing to raise the railway somewhat above the existing ground level. As was made clear in the petition response document, the expected range of that raising from the existing ground level is between 2 metres and 7 metres. The image you see on the screen, the computer-generated image at the bottom of the screen, is we think, significantly overstates that raising in height. But the planting, there will be screen planting to the west. It's shown on the relevant plans, and if we turn to P441 and P441 brackets 1. We can see a cross-section, two cross-sections across the Pickmere embankment from premises, isolated premises which lie to the east, I think, of the village. And we can see that the combination of the flat nature of the landscape and the distance between the nearest premises that are to the railway line in this location, together with, as you can see on the screen, the screen planting that is proposed along the western line of the railway, that combined with the relatively modest height of the embankment will, to a very significant degree, screen the presence of the embankment. Yes, of course, that screening will begin to have greater effect as it matures, so we're talking about a process that will increase in terms of effectiveness. But even at year one, you can see from the effect of the distances on the horizontal line of the graph here, you can see that the effective distance itself will be significantly to diminish the visual effect of the railway line.
I think the simple ask was just whether they could, the screening could include some trees, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I mean, is there anything to prevent HS2 working with the parish council on that? Well,
there's nothing to stop the HS2 working with the local authority, with the district council, who have the statutory responsibility for that under Schedule 17. And I've no doubt that the parish council will have an opportunity to engage with the district council as they make their decision. What I'm very keen to avoid through these hearings is a situation where we have to, as it were, engage with directly, give assurances directly to a multiplicity of local authorities, where there's one local authority which actually bears responsibility for the matter in question. Otherwise, we find that, unlike any other developer, instead of having to make sure that we satisfy the requirements of the local authority who is responsible for the matter in question, whether it be screen planting or noise mitigation, we find that we have to go to 25 other authorities who have no statutory responsibility for that. So those authorities are not excluded from the process. They've come here today. And they will continue to have a role, no doubt, in local community engagement. But it's not appropriate, in my submission, or proportionate to require, as was a consistent theme of this presentation, that HS2 should give a whole series of far-reaching commitments to this council, where it related to matters that are actually under the regulatory control of the district level authority. That simply isn't a sensible way of managing and regulating these matters. So I ask you to bear that thought in mind when you're... It won't lead to ineffective regulation. It will actually be more likely to lead to effective regulation, because there's one source of regulatory decision-making rather than a whole number of them. In terms of the travel arrangements, very good example. Under the statutory regime of Schedule 17, and indeed under the arrangements under the Code of Construction Practice for local traffic management planning, we engage with and we seek the approval of the local highway authority. And we will, I'm sure, we and the local highway authority will share our proposed arrangements for worksite travel planning and so forth with the local community. But the decision-making process in relation to that rests properly with the local highway authority as the responsible body. And that would be it's no different with an ordinary planning application. The parish council doesn't regulate travel plans on major development schemes. The environmental statement, there was ample opportunity to respond to that through the parliamentary process, so I'm not going to say any more about that. And in terms of noise, which I think was another point that was raised.
The noise and potential for insulation. I mean,
well, there is. I've got a sheet which shows you the noise, the assessed position in relation to noise.
Your reference was to noise from the operation of the railway.
Yes.
I mean, if I can just pick up on one of your points, Mr. Mould.
Well, I'm just in the middle of my
Yeah,
presentation.
Mr. Mould does have the floor. So,
yeah.
But you can just confirm with a yes, though, that I think Mr. Tarrant said it's the operational noise. So there is obviously a scheme in place for operational noise post construction. For insulation or mitigation measures, correct?
Absolutely. The very fact that P4421 identifies, by reference to noise impact assessment, those more isolated properties to the east of the village, that are predicted to be affected by the operational noise of the railway. You can see those shown by the notations on the plan. And if you look at the key in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see that, that the various stars and circles and so forth relate to a range of predicted impacts. The short point is, as you know, that where operational noise is predicted to exceed a certain level, then the property in question is eligible for sound insulation. Where the property doesn't where the predictions don't exceed that level, but they exceed the lowest observed adverse effect level, there is a duty on the nominated undertaker under the policy set out in information paper E9, so far as reasonably practicable, to seek to reduce those predicted impacts down to the lowest observed adverse effect level. Now, that doesn't guarantee the offer of sound insulation, but what it does guarantee is that as we move through detailed design, in order to fulfil the policy which will form one of the environmental minimum requirements registered on the parliamentary register in relation to this bill, it will be necessary for the nominated undertaker, working firstly with his or her contractors, but also under the overarching regulatory scrutiny of the local authority, again in the exercise of its powers under Schedule 17, to show that it has produced a range of mitigation measures that are in proportion to the impact. And by that I mean deliver as far as possible, as reasonably possible, effective mitigation, but without disproportionate expenditure of public money. And that is the policy that's set out in information paper E9. That is the policy against which the detail of the railway will be developed, and that is the policy against which the nominated undertaker, in due course, when the right time arises, will submit its detailed mitigation proposals to the local authority under paragraph 9 of Schedule 17 to the bill for that local authority's consideration and approval.
Okay, thank you. Any members, any questions? Ms Flannery, because you did cut yourself down from an hour and a half, I will give you 30 seconds because you wanted to respond to something.
Thank you. I simply wanted to make the point to underline it about the importance of engagement. Had HS2 and Cheshire East effectively engaged with us, we had already gone to them years ago with an effective plan and alternatives to stopping up Budworth Road. And now it's ended up going to an AP and all that expense and delay. It just seems so unnecessary that it's so difficult.
What was outlined on that would be in line with what you were asking, of
Thank
course,
you.
was it? Was it? I mean, that was correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
so if we get that, that's great. Our only overriding message is, as anticipated, HS2 have a plan, a budget and an answer for everything. And we do feel that we have reason to be sceptical about some of the claims, looking at the history of the project since it was first announced. We just ask you to exert some critical faculties, as I'm sure you will do, and thank you for your forbearance on the time.
No, thank you for bearing with us as we ended up taking more time than I hoped on the first petition. So my apologies that you were cut down somewhat, but hopefully we've been able to provide a fair hearing this afternoon.
You have, and we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for your time, and I thank the promoters and everybody as well for attending. And that's the end of today's committee. Order.
The proceeding has ended.